They thought she started a new life until a locked box found 35 years later said otherwise. The dust motes danced in the single beam of sunlight, piercing the attic's gloom. A silent, swirling galaxy in the forgotten space. For years, this room had been a tomb of memories, a collection of things too painful to discard, but too heavy to keep. Old photo albums, a moth-eaten wedding dress in a yellowed box, a child's rocking horse with one eye missing. But it was the steamer trunk in the corner, the one that had belonged to Aunt Elara, that held the real ghosts. Sarah's grandmother, Lily, had finally passed at 92, leaving behind a house that felt more like a museum of a life than a home. The will had been simple, everything to Sarah, her only grandchild. And with that inheritance came the duty of sorting through the decades. The attic was the final frontier. "Just be careful up there, honey," her husband, Mark, had called, from the bottom of the rickety pool downstairs. "Last thing we need is you falling through the ceiling." Sarah had smiled faintly. "Don't worry, I'm just looking for old family photos. Maybe find one of Grandma before her hair went white." But it wasn't a photo she found. It was the trunk. It was made of dark, heavy wood, bound with rusting iron straps. A thick, ornate padlock, green with age, held it shut. Sarah remembered the stories. This was the trunk Elara was supposed to have taken with her when she left. The family's beautiful, tragic mystery. Lily's younger sister, who had vanished in the summer of 1989. The official story, the one whispered at holidays and family gatherings, was that Elara, a wild and free-spirited artist at 21, had simply run away. She'd packed a bag, left a vague note about finding herself, and disappeared into the great wide somewhere. Some said she'd gone to California to become a painter. Others whispered she'd joined a commune in Oregon. The family had accepted it, or at least pretended to. It was easier than confronting the gaping hole she'd left behind. Lily rarely spoke of her, and when she did, her eyes would glaze over with a sadness so profound it felt like a physical presence in the room. She was too bright for this. "Small town," Lily would say, a sad, final punctuation to any inquiry. But the trunk. Why was the trunk still here? If she'd planned to leave, wouldn't she have taken her most prized possessions? Sarah ran her fingers over the cold metal of the padlock. There was no key. Of course, there was no key. Mark's voice drifted up again. "Find anything good?" "Just an old trunk," she called back, her voice tight. "It's locked. Probably. Just full of old blankets." "Leave it for now. Let's get some lunch." But Sarah couldn't leave it. An inexplicable urgency gripped her, a feeling that this dusty, silent object held an answer to a question she hadn't even known she was asking. She rummaged through a nearby toolbox, its contents a jumble of her grandfather's old tools. She found a hammer and a heavy-duty screwdriver. It felt like a desecration, a violation of some unspoken pact. But she couldn't stop herself. She wedged the tip of the screwdriver into the lock's hasp and struck the handle with the hammer. The first blow echoed in the silent attic, a sharp, metallic crack that made her jump. The second blow did nothing. The third, a frustrated, forceful slam, finally made the old metal groan. With a final, desperate wrench, the rusted hasp snapped. The sound was deafening in the stillness. For a moment, Sarah just stood there, her heart pounding against her ribs, her breath catching in her throat. The air suddenly felt colder, heavier. She reached out with trembling hands and lifted the heavy lid. The smell hit her first. It was musty, yes, the smell of old paper and dried lavender. But there was something else underneath, a faint, cloying sweetness. The scent of decay. The top layer was innocuous enough. Neatly folded clothes, the kind of bohemian skirts and peasant blouses that were popular in the late 80s. A stack of vinyl records: The Smiths, The Cure, Kate Bush, a collection of art supplies, half-used tubes of oil paint, charcoal sticks. A portfolio of sketches. Sarah lifted the portfolio. The drawings were exquisite. Portraits of townspeople, landscapes of the surrounding woods, all rendered with a delicate, almost haunting beauty. Elara had been talented. Truly, deeply talented. Beneath the portfolio was a layer of books. Poetry, mostly. Sylvia Plath, Anne Sexton. And then, a small leather-bound diary. Sarah's fingers trembled as she picked it up. The first page was dated January 1st, 1989. The handwriting was a graceful, looping script. New year. Same town, same cage. Father says I should be grateful for our life here. He says the world outside is a dangerous place for a girl like me. He doesn't understand. The most dangerous place for me is right here. A chill snaked down Sarah's spine. This wasn't the journal of a happy-go-lucky girl planning an adventure. This was a cry for help. She put the diary aside, her hands shaking too much to read more. She dug deeper into the trunk, past more clothes and books. Her fingers brushed against something hard and rectangular. A box. A small wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, but heavier. It was intricately carved with vines and flowers, but it too was locked. This time with a small, delicate brass keyhole. There was no key for this either. Frustration warred with a rising sense of dread. She took the screwdriver and hammer again, and with a sickening, splintering sound, pried the lid open. The contents were nestled in a bed of what looked like dried, faded rose petals, and as Sarah looked closer, her blood ran cold. It was a collection of objects. A single tarnished silver earring. A man's gold signet ring with the initial B engraved on it. A lock of blonde hair, tied with a blue ribbon. A photograph, faded and creased, of a smiling Alara with her arm around a handsome dark-haired young man. He was looking at her with an intensity that was almost possessive. And then she saw it. Underneath the photograph, lying on the bed of dead petals, was a small, white object. It was oddly shaped, curved, and porous. Sarah reached in and picked it up. It was smooth, yet ridged in places. It took her a moment, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. It was a bone, a human bone, a piece of a finger, too. Be exact. The distal phalanx. She knew because she'd taken an anatomy class in college, and tied around it, so tightly it was embedded in the porous surface, was a thin silver wire. A strangled gasp escaped her lips. She dropped the bone as if it had burned her. It clattered against the wooden floor of the trunk. A small, terrible sound in the suffocating silence. This wasn't a box of keepsakes. This was a trophy case. Her eyes darted back to the diary. She snatched it up, her hands no longer trembling but rigid with fear. She flipped through the pages, the elegant script blurring before her eyes. The entries grew more frantic, more desperate. March 12th, he followed me home from the library again. He doesn't even try to hide it anymore. He says it's because he worries about me. He says he just wants to keep me safe. It doesn't feel like safety. It feels like a cage. May 5th, he gave me a gift today. A single, perfect white rose. He said it was a symbol of my purity. When I tried to refuse it, his grip on my wrist was so tight, I thought the bones would snap. His eyes, they weren't kind, they were like chips of ice. I have the bruises. To prove it, July 20th, he told me we're going to be together forever. That he'll never let me leave. He said it with a smile, but it sounded like a death sentence. I have to get out. I have to run. I'm packing my trunk. I'll leave in the night. I can't tell Lily. He watches her too. He watches everyone. The last entry was dated August 2nd, 1989. The day before she supposedly vanished. The handwriting was barely legible, a frantic scrawl that tore at the page. He knows, oh God, he knows. He found my trunk. He was waiting for me in my room. He said if I can't belong to him, I can't belong to anyone. He's not going to let me go. He's taking me to the old quarry. He said it's a place where secrets can sleep forever. If anyone finds this, tell them it was him. Tell them it was Sheriff Brody. Don't let him get away with it. Don't let him. The entry ended there, a final jagged slash of ink across the page. Sheriff Brody, the Sheriff Brody, the man who had been the town's beloved, unimpeachable lawman for 40 years. The man who had personally overseen the investigation into Ilara's disappearance. The man who had patted a young, heartbroken Lily on the shoulder, and assured her that her sister had likely just found a new, exciting life, and had simply forgotten to write. The air in the attic was thick, unbreathable. Sarah felt a wave of nausea wash over her. The sweet smell. It wasn't lavender or roses. It was the smell of something hidden, something rotten. They hadn't thought a young woman started a new life. They had been told that by the man who had murdered her. Sarah's gaze fell back to the open trunk, to the small carved box, and the horrifying relic within. A story hadn't ended here. It had been buried. For 35 years, the truth had been locked away in this attic, suffocating in the dark. While a killer walked free, cloaked in a hero's uniform, she heard Mark's footsteps on the stairs. "Sarah, you okay? You've been up there for a while." She couldn't speak. She could only stare at the last terrible words Ilara had ever written. Her mind was a maelstrom of horror and disbelief. The beloved town sheriff. A murderer. Her Grattant, not a runaway, but a victim. And her grandmother, Lily, had she known. Had she spent her entire life carrying the weight of this terrible secret, living in the same small town as her sister's killer? The pull-down stairs creaked as Mark's head and shoulders appeared in the opening. His cheerful expression faltered when he saw her face, pale and stricken in the dusty light. "Sarah, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah's lips parted, but no sound came out. She could only point a trembling finger at the open trunk, at the diary clutched in her white-knuckled hand, at the box that held the unspeakable proof. Her entire world, the entire history of her family, had just been fractured. The past was not dead. It wasn't even past, and it was screaming Ilara. The name itself was a whisper in the town of Havenwood, a melody played in a minor key. Before, she was a ghost story. She was a flash of color in a world of beige and gray. She was the scent of turpentine and wildflowers, the sound of wind chimes and forbidden rock music played too loud from her bedroom window. At 21, she was a creature of vibrant, almost painful life. Her hair was the color of dark honey, long and untamed, and her eyes were a startling shade of green, flecked with gold. They were eyes that saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. A canvas waiting for her brush. She lived in the same house that Sarah now stood in, but it had been different then. It had been a place of stifling order, ruled by her father, a stern, God-fearing man who saw his daughter's artistic spirit as a form of rebellion. He was a man who believed in straight lines and clear rules, and Ilara was all swirling curves and blurred edges. Her mother, a gentle, faded woman, had long ago learned that peace was found in silence. And so, Ilara's only true confidant, her only ally in the quiet war of her own home, was her older sister, Lily. Lily was Ilara's opposite. Where Ilara was fire, Lily was earth. She was steady, practical, her feet planted firmly on the ground. She had a quiet beauty, a gentle smile, and a heart full of fierce, protective love for her untamable younger sister. She was the one who would sneak Ilara extra canvases when their father cut off her allowance. The one who would listen for hours as Ilara dreamed of escaping to a city where art was celebrated, not condemned. Lily didn't share Ilara's dreams. Her own were smaller, rooted in the familiar soil of Havenwood. But she defended Ilara's right to have them with a silent ferocity. Their bond was the one truly unbreakable thing in Ilara's life. A safe harbor in a turbulent sea. The summer of 1989 was supposed to be Ilara's last in Havenwood. She was saving every penny she earned waitressing at the town diner, squirreling it away in a coffee can hidden under a loose floorboard in her room. Her destination was a closely guarded secret, a magical word whispered only to Lily, Florence. She would study the masters, live on bread and wine, and paint until her fingers were raw. It was a dream so vivid she could almost taste the Tuscan air. But Havenwood had its own gravity, and its center was Sheriff Alistair Brodie. To the town, Brodie was a patriarch. He had been sheriff for 2 decades, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a presence that filled every room he entered. His hair was the color of steel, his jaw was perpetually set in a firm line, and his eyes, a pale, piercing blue, seemed to see everything. He was the man who found lost dogs, who gave stern but fatherly lectures to teenagers caught speeding, who organized the annual town picnic. He was married to a quiet, nervous woman named Clara, and they had a son, a boy a few years younger than Alara, who seemed to be a ghost in his own home. Brody was the embodiment of safety, of order, of the very values Ilare's father held so dear. He was a hero, but Ilare saw something different in his eyes. He had started coming to the diner more often that spring. He would always sit in her section, his gaze lingering on her long after he'd given his order. At first, it was flattering. He was the most powerful man in town, and he was paying attention to her. He would compliment her sketches, which she sometimes doodled on napkins. During her break, "You have a real gift, Ilara," he'd say, his voice a low rumbling baritone. A rare and precious thing. But the compliments soon began to feel like assessments. His attention felt less like admiration and more like ownership. He would ask about her friends, her plans, her comings and goings. He started appearing wherever she was, at the library, the grocery store, even on the secluded walking trails in the woods where she went to sketch. He would call it coincidence, a friendly check-in. "Just making sure one of our town's treasures is safe," he'd say with a smile that never quite reached his cold blue eyes. Ilara started to feel a creeping unease, a sense of being watched, catalogued. She mentioned it to Lily one night, as they sat on the porch swing, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle. "Sheriff Brody gives me the creeps," Ilara had confessed, her voice low. "He's always there." Lily had frowned, her brow furrowed with concern. "What do you mean? He's always been nice to me." "It's not that he's not nice," Ilara struggled to explain. "It's the way he's nice, it feels sticky, like a spiderweb." She shuddered. "The other day, he told me my hair was like spun gold, and then he reached out and touched it. I felt like I needed to scrub my skin off." Lily's protective instincts flared. "Did he hurt you?" "No, not really. It's just a feeling, a bad feeling." But in a town that worshipped Alistair Brody, what could they do? Who would believe them? He was the law. His word was gospel. To accuse him of anything would be to accuse the town itself. So they kept it between them, a small, dark secret in the heart of their sisterhood. The hidden witness to this escalating drama was a boy named Thomas Miller. Tommy was 17 that summer, a shy, awkward kid who was all elbows and knees. He was the sheriff's son's only friend, which granted him occasional uncomfortable access to the Brody household. He was a silent observer by nature, the kind of boy who faded into the wallpaper, and from that vantage point, he saw things. He saw the way Sheriff Brody spoke to his wife, Clara, his voice dripping with a condescending sweetness in public that turned to icy command behind closed doors. He saw the way Clara flinched when her husband's hand came down on her shoulder, a gesture that looked like affection to outsiders but was a signal of control. He saw the fear in his friend's eyes, a constant, simmering terror of his own. Father, the Brody house, so perfect and stately from the outside, was a place of suffocating tension, and Tommy saw the way the sheriff looked at Ilara. He worked part-time as a busboy at the diner, and he watched the interactions from the shadows of the kitchen. He saw the possessive glint in Brody's eyes, the way his knuckles would turn white when he saw Ilara laughing with someone else. Tommy had a hopeless boyish crush on Ilara himself. He loved her from afar, admiring her spirit and her art. He saw her as a bird of paradise, and he saw the cage Brody was slowly, methodically building around her. One sweltering afternoon in July, Tommy was in the Brody's garage, helping his friend fix a bicycle chain, when the sheriff came in. He was holding a small, exquisitely carved wooden box. Tommy recognized it. Instantly, it was one of Elara's. He'd seen her sketching the design for it on a napkin just a week before. "Look what our little artist gave me," Brody had said to his son, his voice full of false bonhomie, a token of her appreciation. Tommy's friend said nothing, his eyes fixed on the greasy bicycle chain. Brody ran a thumb over the carved lid. "She's a special girl, needs a firm hand, needs protecting from the world, from herself." He looked directly at Tommy then, his blue eyes like ice picks. "You understand that, don't you, son?" Tommy, his heart hammering in his chest, could only nod. It wasn't a question. It was a warning, a clear, cold threat. Stay silent. See nothing. Say nothing. He knew the box wasn't a gift. He knew, with a certainty that made him sick to his stomach, that Brody had taken it. Just as he was trying to take Ilara herself, the final piece of the tragic puzzle clicked into place a week before. Ilara disappeared. Tommy was cutting through the woods behind the diner, a shortcut home, when he heard voices. He ducked behind a thicket of ferns. It was Ilara and Sheriff Brody, standing in a small clearing. "I'm asking you to leave me alone," Ilara was saying, her voice trembling but firm. She was clutching her portfolio to her chest like a shield. "Now, why would I do that?" Brody's voice was smooth, dangerously calm. "I'm just looking out for you. I don't need you to look out for me. I can take care of myself." Brody took a step closer. The setting sun cast his shadow long and menacing over her. "You're a naive child, Ilara. You have no idea what men in this world are capable of. You need a man to guide you, to keep you safe, to keep you pure. You're not my father. You're not my husband. You're nothing to me," she spat, her fear giving way to fury. The change was instantaneous. The mask of the benevolent patriarch fell away, revealing the predator beneath. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. Ilara cried out in pain. "I could be everything to you," he snarled, his face inches from hers, "and you'd do well to remember that. You belong to this town. You belong here, with me. Any thoughts you have of leaving, you should put them out of your mind. It would be a terrible mistake." He let her go as suddenly as he'd grabbed her, shoving her back a step. He smoothed his uniform, his composure returning as quickly. As it had vanished, he gave her a thin, chilling smile. "Have a good evening, Ilara." He walked away, leaving her standing alone in the dappled, dying light, clutching her arm, her face a mask of terror and disbelief. Tommy stayed hidden, his body frozen, his breath trapped in his lungs. He had seen the monster. He had heard the threat, he was a witness. But he was just a boy, and the monster wore a badge. Fear, cold and absolute, coiled in his gut. He turned and ran. The sound of his own panicked footsteps, loud in the silent woods. He ran from the truth, from what he had seen. And for 35 years, he never stopped running. The summer heat of 1989 pressed down on Havenwood like a physical weight, thick and suffocating. For Ilara, it was the heat of a closing fist. The encounter in the woods had stripped away any last illusions of safety. Brody's obsession was no longer a creeping unease. It was a tangible threat, a shadow that clung to her every step. The town, once a cage of boredom, now felt like a prison, and the sheriff was its warden. His cruelty became bolder, more overt, a performance of power for an audience of one. He started parking his patrol car across the street from her house. At night, the vehicle a silent, hulking sentinel in the darkness. He would sit there for hours, a dark shape behind the wheel. When Ilara would peek through her curtains, she would sometimes see the flare of a match as he lit a cigarette, the brief glow illuminating his stony profile. He was telling her, without words, that there was no escape. He owned the night. The psychological torment escalated. He began to isolate her, using his authority as a weapon. He paid a visit to the diner's owner, a portly, nervous man named Mr. Henderson. The next day, Ilara was taken off the schedule. "I'm sorry, Ilara," Mr. Henderson had stammered, avoiding her eyes. "It's just, business has been slow. I have to make cutbacks." She knew it was a lie. She saw the truth in the sweat on his brow, in the way he kept glancing towards the front window, as if expecting the sheriff's car to pull up. Brody had poisoned her well. He had taken her job, her small measure of independence, and with it, the last of the money she needed for her escape to Florence. Betrayal came from places she never expected. Her friends, the ones she'd grown up with, began to drift away. Conversations would stop when she entered a room. Invitations would dry up. Brody's influence was insidious. He would stop one of her friends on the street, put a fatherly arm around their shoulder, and speak in low, confidential tones. "Just be careful around Elora," he'd say, his voice laced with false concern. "She's been troubled lately, a bit unstable. I wouldn't want you getting caught in her drama." He painted her as a problem, a contagion, and the town, in its fear and reverence for him, complied. She was being systematically erased from her own life. The humiliation was public and brutal. One afternoon, she was sketching by the town pond when Brody pulled up. He got out of his car and strode over to her, his boots heavy on the grass. He didn't say a word. He simply took her sketchbook from her hands, flipped through the pages with a contemptuous sneer, and then, with a deliberate theatrical motion, he tore a page out. It was a charcoal portrait of Lily. He crumpled it in his fist and tossed it into the murky water of the pond. "This is childish nonsense," he said, his voice loud enough for the family picnicking nearby to hear. "A grown woman should have better things to do than scribble in a notebook like a little girl." Tears of rage and shame burned in Elora's eyes. She stood frozen, her whole body trembling, as he dropped the sketchbook at her feet and walked away. The family at the picnic table stared, their faces a mixture of pity and suspicion. They saw a troubled girl being disciplined by the town's patient patriarch. They didn't see the tyrant, the bully, the man who was systematically breaking her spirit. Lily was her only anchor in the storm. She saw her sister's vibrant colors fading to gray, the light in her eyes dimming. The fear was a constant presence in their house, a third person in every room. "We have to tell someone," Lily insisted one night, her voice a desperate whisper. They were in Elora's room, the door locked, the curtains drawn tight against the watching eyes of the patrol car outside. Elara was sitting on her bed, her arms wrapped around herself, her face pale and drawn. "Tell who, Lily?" Elara's voice was hollow, brittle. "He is everyone. He's the police. He's the town council. He's in Dad's ear, telling him, I'm a delinquent. Who would we tell? Who would ever believe us? Mum, Dad." Elara let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Dad thinks he's a saint. He said Brody told him he was keeping an eye on me for our family's sake, and Mom, she just wants peace. She'll look the other way. She always does." The truth of it hung between them, heavy and suffocating. They were alone, two young women, against a man who held all the power. The danger was no longer just psychological. It was becoming physical. He would corner her in the aisles of the grocery store, his body blocking her path, his voice a low threat in her ear. "You look so pretty when you're scared, Elora." He started leaving things for her on the porch. A single dead bird, a wilted black rose, macabre trophies of his obsession. Each one was a message. "I can touch you whenever I want. I can bring death to your doorstep." Meanwhile, Tommy Miller was living in his own private hell of silence. He saw it all. He saw Elara's growing desperation, the dark circles under her eyes. He saw the sheriff's smug satisfaction, the triumphant glint in his eye. Every time he saw Brody's patrol car, every time he heard the man's name spoken, with reverence, a wave of nausea and guilt washed over him. His conscience was at war with his fear. He knew he should speak up. He should tell someone what he saw in the woods. He should tell them that Brody was a monster. But the fear was paralyzing. Brody was his friend's father. He had been in Tommy's house. He had looked Tommy in the eye and issued his silent threat. What would a man like that do to a boy who talked? He tried, once. He approached his own father, a quiet, hard-working mechanic who wanted no trouble. Tommy sat at the kitchen table, his hands trembling, and tried to find the words. "Dad, I think Sheriff Brody is bothering Elara." His father didn't look up from his newspaper. "Alistair Brody is a good man. He's the best friend this town has. Don't go spreading gossip, Thomas. It'll only lead to trouble." And that was it. The door was closed. The fear had won. Tommy's silence became a stone in his gut, a weight he would carry for the rest of his life. He was the hidden witness, the boy in the shadows, and his inaction was its own form of betrayal. He watched as the net tightened around Alara, as the injustice escalated. And he did nothing. The final, desperate act for Alara was the trunk. Florence was a pipe dream now. All she wanted was to escape, to run anywhere. She began to pack in. Secret, late at night, when the house was still and the only sound was the distant hum of Brody's car engine. She packed her clothes, her art, her books. The trunk was her ark, her one hope of surviving the flood. She wrote in her diary, her words a frantic, terrified chronicle of her last days in Havenwood. The diary was her only confidant, the only place she could scream the truth. She planned to leave on the night of August 2nd. She had a little money saved from before. Enough for a bus ticket to anywhere. She would wait until after midnight, slip out of the house, and walk the 5 miles to the bus station in the next town. She told Lily the plan, and her sister, her face a mask of fear and love, promised to help. She would create a distraction, argue with their father, anything to keep the attention away from Alara's window. But Brody's surveillance was absolute. His cruelty was boundless. He saw everything. He knew about the lights on in her room late at night. He knew something was changing. The night she planned to leave, he didn't just watch from his car. He decided to end the game. The conflict had escalated past the point of no return. The injustice was no longer a slow poison. It was a dagger poised to strike. Alara was trapped, betrayed by her community, hunted by a man cloaked in righteousness. Lily was a helpless accomplice, her heart breaking for the sister she couldn't save. And Tommy, the boy who knew the truth, was locked in a prison of his own fear. The air was electric with tension, the stage set for the final brutal act. The slow, agonizing burn of the summer was about to explode into a fire that would consume them all. That night of August 2nd was heavy and starless. The air so thick with humidity it felt like breathing water. A storm was brewing on the horizon, the distant rumble of thunder, a low growl that mirrored the terror in Ilara's heart. This was it, the night of her escape. The steamer trunk sat by her bedroom door like a silent accomplice, packed with the meager remnants of her life and the ghost of a dream called Florence. Lily had done her part, starting a loud, pointless argument with their father over a broken dish. The sound of their raised voices echoing through the old house. Providing the perfect cover, Alara scribbled the last frantic entry in her diary, her hand shaking so badly the words were nearly illegible. He knows, oh God, he knows. She had seen his car not in its usual spot across the street, but parked just down the block, tucked into the shadows of a large oak tree. It was a subtle shift, but it screamed danger. She had to go now. She tucked the diary into the carved wooden box, the one Brody had once stolen, and returned with a smirk and placed it carefully inside the trunk. She took one last look around the room that had been her sanctuary and her prison. With a deep, shuddering breath, she clicked off her bedside lamp, plunging the room into darkness. She cracked open her door, listening. The argument downstairs had subsided into a tense silence. She began to drag the heavy trunk towards the window. It was a low, wide window that overlooked the backyard, with a trellis covered in climbing roses running right beside it, her planned escape route. The trunk scraped against the wooden floor, the sound deafeningly loud in the stillness. She froze, her heart hammering against her ribs, and then a voice from the darkest corner of her room spoke, low and chillingly calm. Going somewhere, Alara. A scream caught in her throat. Sheriff Brody stepped out of the shadows, a looming silhouette against the faint light from the hallway. He wasn't in uniform. He was dressed in dark civilian clothes, which was somehow more terrifying. He had been in her room the whole time, waiting in the dark, a predator enjoying the fear of his cornered prey. "How did you get in?" she whispered, her voice a thread of sound. "I'm the sheriff," he said with a soft, terrible chuckle. "I have keys to everything in this town, including you." He moved towards her, and she scrambled backwards, tripping over a rug and falling to the floor. He loomed over her, his face a mask of cold fury. "You really thought you could leave me?" he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You really thought I would let you go?" After everything I've done to keep you safe, to keep you pure, he gestured to the trunk, packing your little treasures, your little secrets. Before she could react, he strode to the trunk and threw open the lid. He rummaged through it with a rough, dismissive violence, tossing her clothes, her books, her art supplies onto the floor. Then he saw the carved wooden box. He snatched it up. What's this? More secrets. He shook it, and the contents rattled. He didn't bother with the lock. He smashed it against the corner of the trunk, splintering the wood. The contents spilled out onto the floor, the earring, the ring, the lock of hair, the photograph, and her diary. He picked up the diary, a triumphant, cruel smile twisting his lips. He opened it, his eyes scanning the last page. The frantic scrawl that named him as her tormentor. Tell them it was Sheriff Brody, he read aloud, his voice dripping with mockery. Don't let him get away with it. He let out a short, sharp laugh. You foolish little girl, there's no one to tell. There's nowhere to run. Tears streamed down Ilara's face, tears of pure, undiluted terror. Please, she begged, her voice cracking. Please, just let me go. Let you go. His face hardened, the false charm gone, replaced by something utterly monstrous. You belong to me, and if I can't have you, no one will. He grabbed her by the arm, his grip like iron, and hauled her to her feet. He dragged her from the room, down the back stairs, and out into the suffocating darkness of the backyard. The storm was closer now, a flash of lightning illuminating the yard for a split second. Revealing the terror on Ilara's face, she tried to scream, but he clamped a hand over her mouth, his fingers digging into her cheeks. Be quiet, he snarled, his breath hot and foul against her ear. Or your sister will be next. That threat silenced her more effectively than his hand ever could. The thought of this monster turning his attention to Lily was unbearable. She went limp, her body shaking with sobs, as he dragged her across the wet grass towards his car, hidden in the shadows. The plot twist, the hidden clue that would change everything, wasn't a single object, but a confluence of two. The first was the diary, now lying on Ilara's bedroom floor, its most damning page exposed to the world. The second was a hidden witness who finally found his courage. 35 years too late. After Brody dragged Ilara away, a profound, deathly silence fell over the house. Upstairs, Lily, her heart pounding with a nameless dread, crept out of her room. The argument with her father had been a sham, but the fear she felt was real. The silence from Ilara's room was wrong. She pushed open the door. Ilara, the scene that met her eyes was one of pure chaos. The overturned trunk, the clothes and books scattered across the floor like fallen leaves, and in the center of it all, the splintered remains of the carved box. Lily's eyes fell upon the open diary. She knelt, her hands trembling, and read the final, terrifying entry. Sheriff Brody. He's taking me to the old quarry. A wave of cold dread, so intense it almost made her pass out, washed over her. She knew the quarry. It was a desolate, abandoned place, miles out of town. A gaping wound in the earth, filled with deep black water. A place where secrets could sleep forever. She had the truth, she had the proof, clutched in her hand. But what could she do? Run to the police station? Run to the man who had just abducted her sister? It was a hopeless, impossible situation. At that exact moment, another drama was unfolding just a few blocks away. Tommy Miller was sitting in his bedroom, staring out at the storm, when he saw it. Sheriff Brody's car, not his patrol vehicle, but his personal sedan, driving slowly down the street. Away from the direction of Ilara's house, he saw it turn onto the old highway, the one that led out of town, towards the quarry. And in the split second that a flash of lightning illuminated the car's interior, he saw a passenger in the front seat. A woman with long, dark, honey-colored hair, her head slumped against the window. It was her. It was Elara. Everything he had seen, everything he had feared, coalesced into a single terrible certainty. The scene in the woods, the threats, the stolen box, it wasn't just harassment anymore. This was an abduction. This was something far, far worse. The stone of fear in his gut was still there. But now it was joined by something else. A burning, unbearable shame. His silence had made him an accomplice. His fear had paved the way for this. He thought of Ellora's vibrant smile, her fierce spirit. He thought of the way Brody had looked at her, like a collector admiring a butterfly he was about to pin to a board, and in that moment, Tommy Miller, the silent, frightened boy, made a choice. He ran from his house, not away from the truth, but towards it. He didn't know what he was going to do. He just knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. He ran through the rain-swept streets. His destination, the one place he knew he had to go. The only place that mattered, Ilaros' house. He arrived, breathless and soaked, to find the front door unlocked. He crept inside, his heart pounding. He heard a sound from upstairs, a soft, choked sob. He followed it to Ilara's room. He found Lily kneeling on the floor, the diary clutched in her hands, her body shaking with grief and terror. She looked up as he entered, her eyes wide and haunted. "He has her," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He took her?" Tommy just nodded, his own throat tight with fear. "I saw them, they're heading to the quarry." Lily held up the diary. She wrote it down. She wrote everything, what he did, who he is. This was it, the proof, the diary. Was the confession? Tommy was the witness to the abduction itself. The conspiracy was no longer just in their minds. It was real, and they were the only two people on Earth who knew it. But the conspiracy was bigger than just Brody. It was the town itself. It was the decades of blind reverence, the carefully constructed myth of the hero sheriff. To bring this truth to light wouldn't just be accusing a man. It would be accusing Heavenwood of a terrible, collective blindness. The stakes had just shifted from a personal tragedy to a public scandal that would tear the town apart. What do we do? Lily's voice was barely a whisper. We can't go to the police. He is the police. Tommy's mind was racing. That fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach. But now, it was overshadowed by a desperate, frantic urgency. They had to do something. They couldn't let him get away with it. They couldn't let Ellora's last words be for nothing. We have to hide it, Tommy said, his voice finding a strength he didn't know he possessed. We have to hide the diary. Somewhere, he'll never find it. Somewhere, it will be safe. He looked at the trunk, the vessel of Ellora's hopes, now a coffin of her secrets. We put it back, he said, his plan forming in the crucible of his terror. We put it all back. Working with a frantic, silent coordination, they gathered the scattered contents. They placed the clothes, the books, the art supplies back into the trunk, and then the carved box. They placed the diary inside the splintered container, along with the other small, tragic mementos. But as Tommy picked up the photograph of Ilara and the young man, he hesitated. This couldn't go in. It would raise questions. They needed the secret to be absolute. He slipped the photo into his own pocket. Then he took the box and placed it at the very bottom of the trunk. He'll come back, Lily whispered, her eyes wide with terror. He'll search the house, he'll find it. No, he won't, Tommy said. He looked at the heavy padlock and the broken hasp lying on the floor. He picked them up. We lock it. We make it look like it was never opened. He wedged the broken hasp back into place. It was a crude fix, but in the dark, it might hold. He clicked the padlock shut. They dragged the heavy trunk to the darkest corner of the room and pushed it against the wall. Then, they cleaned. They picked up every last splinter of wood, every stray piece of paper. They made the room look undisturbed, as if Ilara had simply vanished from it, leaving her packed trunk behind. The final, terrible piece of their plan was the lie. When they asked, Tommy said, his voice low and steady, "We say she ran away. We say she finally did it. She packed her trunk, but got scared and left it behind. She just took a bag and left. It's what everyone expects, it's what he'll expect." Lily looked at him, her face a mess of tears, but a flicker of understanding. In her eyes, it was a monstrous lie, a betrayal of Ilara's memory. But it was also their only weapon. By pretending to believe the story Brody himself would inevitably create, they could protect the evidence. They could plant the seed of the truth and wait for it to grow. Even if it took a lifetime. The personal pain was now a public conspiracy. The tension had reached its zenith. They were no longer just victims of circumstance. They were active participants in a cover-up, a desperate gamble to preserve a truth too dangerous to tell. The stage was set for a justice that would be delayed by 35 years. A cinematic payoff, born from a terrified teenager's desperate plan and a sister's unbearable choice. The courtroom was a pressure cooker, simmering with 35 years of secrets. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, cheap cologne, and palpable tension. On one side sat Sarah, her face pale but resolute, the weight of her family's history resting on her shoulders. Beside her was Thomas Miller, now a man in his early 50s, his hair graying at the temples, his face etched with the lines of a life spent carrying a terrible burden. He was no longer the frightened boy from the woods. He was a man about to set a match to his own past. On the other side, at the defendant's table, sat Alistair Brodie. At 75, he was a stooped, withered version of the Titan who had once ruled Havenwood. His hair was a wispy white, his hands trembled with age, but his eyes were the same, pale, piercing, and utterly devoid of remorse. He was flanked by a high-priced lawyer from the city, his expression one of bored confidence. To him, this was a circus. A baseless accusation dredged up from the distant past against a decorated public servant. The trial had been the only story in town for weeks. The discovery in the attic, the exhumation of the old quarry, the bone fragment, confirmed by DNA to be Ella Rosette, had all ripped the carefully woven fabric of Havenwood to shreds. The town was divided. Many still clung to the image of the hero sheriff, unable or unwilling to believe the monster beneath. They saw Sarah as a troublemaker, Tommy as a liar seeking attention. But others, the ones who had lived through that summer, felt a dawning, sickening sense of recognition. They remembered Ilara's fear, Brodie's suffocating presence. They remembered the whispers. The prosecution had built its case carefully, brick by brick. They had presented the diary, its pages now preserved in evidence bags, Ilara's elegant, scripture voice from the grave. They had Sarah's testimony about finding the trunk, the lock, the box of trophies. But it was all circumstantial. Brodie's lawyer had masterfully painted Ilara as a troubled, promiscuous, and mentally unstable young woman. He argued the diary was fiction, the ramblings of a melodramatic girl. He claimed the items in the box were gifts from her many lovers. He was creating just enough doubt, just enough smoke, to obscure the fire. The climax of the trial, the moment everything hinged on, was the testimony of Thomas Miller. He was the prosecution's final witness. As he took the stand, a hush fell over the courtroom. He looked directly at Brodie, his gaze steady. For the first time, Brodie's mask of stoic indifference seemed to crack. A flicker of something annoyance, recognition, perhaps even fear passed through his cold blue eyes. The prosecutor, a sharp, determined woman named Maria Flores, began her questioning. She led Tommy through the events of that summer. His voice quiet but clear as he recounted Brodie's harassment, the scene in the woods, the fear that had kept him silent. Brodie's lawyer objected repeatedly hearsay, speculation, but the judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman, overruled him each time. "The witness will be heard," she stated, her eyes fixed on Tommy. Then, Flores arrived at the heart of it. "Mr. Miller, please tell the court what you saw on the night of August 2nd, 1989. Tommy took a deep breath. "I saw Sheriff Brodie's car, his personal car. He was driving out of town towards the old quarry, and I saw Ilara in the passenger seat. I saw her hair, her profile. He was taking her away." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. This was the bombshell. The direct eyewitness account that linked Brodie to Ilara's final moments. Brodie's lawyer was on his feet, his face red with fury. "Objection. The witness is inventing a story. It was dark, it was storming. He couldn't possibly have identified anyone." Flores smiled grimly. "Mr. Miller, how can you be so certain it was Ilara in that car?" And this was the moment. The cinematic payoff that Tommy had been rehearsing in his mind for 3.5 decades. It wasn't just about what he saw. It was about what he did. Because of this, Tommy said, his voice ringing with newfound strength. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small plastic evidence bag. Inside was a faded, creased photograph. Flores took the bag and placed it on the projector. An image flickered to life on the large screen behind the witness stand, visible to the entire courtroom. It was the photo from Ilara's box. A smiling Ilara, her arm around a handsome, dark-haired young man. This photograph was in the box. With the diary, Tommy explained. When Lily and I decided to hide the evidence, I took it. I knew it would be a problem. I knew it would make it look like Ilara had a secret boyfriend, a reason to run away. It would have supported the very lie we were trying to create. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The lie that Sheriff Brody himself would tell everyone the next day. The lie that a troubled girl had run off with a new lover. He then turned his gaze from the prosecutor to the jury, his eyes pleading with them to understand. But I kept it. I don't know why. Maybe I felt like I needed to hold on to one piece of her, one piece of the truth that wasn't buried in that trunk. Brody's lawyer, seeing his narrative crumbling, scrambled. This proves nothing. It's a picture of the victim with an unknown man. It only supports our claim that she was promiscuous. He's not unknown, Tommy said quietly. The courtroom fell silent again. All eyes were on him. His name was Daniel. He was a college student who worked on the farms during the summer. He and Ilara were in love. He was her future. He was the reason she was so desperate to get to Florence. They were going to go together. Flores stepped forward. And how do you know this, Mr. Miller? Because Ilara told me, he said. She was my friend. And she was afraid. She told me Brody was threatening her, and that he was threatening Daniel too. Brody had warned Daniel to stay away from her. He was jealous. He was obsessed. He couldn't stand the thought of her belonging to someone else. And then, Tommy delivered the final, devastating blow. He looked directly at Alistair Brody. The night she disappeared, I didn't just see Ilara in your car. Earlier that evening, I saw you talking to Daniel by the river. I was hidden. I was always hiding. I heard you tell him that if he didn't leave town immediately, you would arrest him on trumped-up charges. You told him you would ruin his life. You told him you would make sure he never saw Ilara again. You scared him away. You isolated her. You made sure she had no one to turn to, no one to protect her. And then you went to her house to claim your prize. Alistair Brody shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. The mask of the calm, dignified old man shattered into a million pieces. Lies. He roared, his voice a hoarse, rattling sound. All of it, lies. He's a pathetic, attention-seeking coward, am I? Tommy's voice was like steel. Then tell me, Sheriff, if I'm lying, how did I know about Daniel? His name isn't in the diary. Ilara never told her family about him because she was afraid of what you and her father would do. No one in this town knew about him. No one. Except you and me. Checkmate. The courtroom erupted. Brody's lawyer tried to restrain him, but the old man shoved him away, his eyes wild, his composure gone. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at Tommy. You little worm. You should have stayed in the shadows where you belong. It was a confession, wrapped in a threat. An admission of knowledge, of a shared secret, that only the witness and the murderer could know. In that moment, everyone in the room saw him. Not the hero, not the patriarch, but the monster. The 75-year-old man, his face contorted with hate, was the same predator who had stolen a young woman's life and buried the truth for a generation. The judge slammed her gavel, her voice booming over the chaos. Order, order in the court. Mr. Brody, you will sit down and be silent, or I will have you held in contempt. But it was too late. The dam had broken. The public exposure was absolute, the revenge poetic. Brody's own rage, his own uncontainable evil, had convicted him. He was arrested on the spot, not for contempt, but for the murder of Ilara. The sound of the handcuffs clicking around his withered wrists was the sound of justice. 35 years delayed, but finally, explosively, delivered. Sarah burst into Tears, not of sorrow, but of cathartic release. Tommy Miller sat on the stand, the weight of a lifetime lifting from his shoulders. His head bowed as silent tears tracked down his face. The cinematic payoff was complete. The ghost of Alara could finally rest. The autumn that followed the trial was a season of quiet reflection for Havenwood. The explosive verdict had acted like a purifying fire, burning away the rot that had festered at the town's core for so long. The name Alistair Brodie, once spoken with reverence, was now a curse. A cautionary tale whispered to children about the monsters that can hide in plain sight. He died in prison less than a year later, a bitter, forgotten old man, consumed by the hatred that had driven his life. For Sarah, the aftermath was a journey into the past, a bittersweet reconstruction of the great-aunt she had never known. With Tommy's help, she began to piece together Ilara's life, not the tragic myth, but the vibrant reality. They found Daniel, the boy from the photograph. He was a retired professor living in California, a kind, gentle man who had never married. He had carried the torch for Alara his entire life, believing, as he had been told, that she had simply changed her mind and never wanted to see him again. The reunion between Tommy and Daniel was a quiet, poignant affair, to old men sharing a grief that had been buried for decades. Daniel wept when he learned the truth, his sorrow mingled with a strange sense of relief. The woman he had loved hadn't abandoned him. She had been stolen from him. He shared his memories of Alara, laughter, her passion, her fierce determination. He gave Sarah a small, worn photograph he had kept in his wallet for over 30 years, a picture of Alara, smiling, holding a single white rose, a look of pure joy on her face. It was a glimpse of the future she had been denied, Sarah decided. To turn her grandmother's house, the house where Alara had lived and dreamed, into a memorial. She converted the large front room into a small gallery, a permanent exhibition of Alara's art. The sketches from the trunk, the landscapes, the portraits, they were finally brought out of the darkness and into the light. The centerpiece of the gallery was a large, professional photograph of the final page of the diary, Ilara's last words, a stark, powerful testament to the truth. The gallery became a place of pilgrimage, not just for the people of Havenwood, but for others who had been touched by the story. It was a place of healing, a reminder of the cost of silence and the power of truth. One crisp November afternoon, Sarah and Tommy stood before a new grave marker in the town cemetery. It was a simple, elegant stone of white marble, placed next to the grave of her grandmother, Lily. The inscription was short, but it said everything. Ilara read, 1968 to 1989. Artist daughter, sister, finally. Home. Sarah placed a bouquet of wildflowers at the base of the stone. Do you think Grandma knew? She asked quietly. The question that had haunted her since she first opened the trunk. Do you think she knew the truth all along? Tommy was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the two headstones. Sister beside sister. I used to think so, he said, his voice raspy with emotion. I used to think she was like me, a prisoner of her own fear. But now I think she was a prisoner of something else. Hope. He turned to Sarah, his eyes full of a deep, sorrowful understanding. I think she locked that trunk and pushed it into the darkest corner of the attic because she couldn't bear to look at the truth. But she couldn't bear to destroy it either. I think she was waiting. Not for Brodie to confess, not for the police to figure it out. I think she was waiting for you. He reached out and placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. She was waiting for someone strong enough to carry the truth. Someone who wasn't afraid of the dark. She saved the story for you, Sarah. She trusted you to tell it. The words settled over Sarah, a weight and a gift all at once. She looked at the two graves, at the names etched in stone, and finally understood the silent sacrifice of her grandmother's life. Lily hadn't been weak. She had been a guardian. She had lived her entire life in the same town as her sister's murderer, carrying the unbearable weight of the truth, protecting it, preserving it, until the day it could finally be set free. It was an act of profound, heartbreaking love. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cemetery. The air grew cold, and the lingering emotional echo of Ellora's story settled around them. It was a story of a life cut short, of justice delayed, of a truth that refused to die. It was a haunting reminder that the past is never truly gone. Its secrets buried just beneath the surface, waiting for the right hands to unlock them. The silence of Havenwood had finally been broken, replaced by the enduring, tragic, and beautiful melody of Ellora's name. Her ghost was no longer a whisper. It was a song, and it would never be forgotten.